Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the SHAIR podcast. And today we have Ben Heldenfond joining us on the show, the author of Our Happy Divorce. And this is such a great episode because it's not often that we get a chance to discuss a healthy divorce, the concept of uncoupling in a healthy way, and more importantly, using the tools of recovery to guide us along the way. It's what helped me get through my divorce. It's what helped Ben get through his divorce. But more importantly, it has allowed us both to be in happy, healthy, loving relationships. This is a fantastic episode. I know you're going to get a lot out of it. But before we dive into today's episode, if you enjoy watching the SHAIR podcast on YouTube, then click on the subscribe button below. And also be sure to check out the SHAIR podcast website to check out all our recovery resources, including our membership community, the SHAIR recovery community. And also be sure to check out omarpinto.com if you're looking to do some one-on-one coaching with me. So now let's dive into today's episode with Ben Heldenfond. Welcome back to another episode of the SHAIR podcast. I'm your host, Omar Pinto. And if you want to overcome unhealthy habits and feel better now, then this is the perfect podcast for you. Now, in today's episode, we have Ben Heldenfond joining us on the show, the author of Our Happy Divorce, How Ending Our Marriage Brought Us Together. From weekend dinners and homework sessions to Christmas card photos and vacations, Nikki and Ben have created a tight-knit, enviable family. They work and play well together from the smallest daily tasks to the biggest life events, and it only took a divorce to get them there. Though their marriage has been over for nearly a decade, they still share a happy life with each other and their son, Asher, along with their spouses and children. Welcome to the show, Ben.
Thank you, Omar. You know, it is a true honor to be on your show, not only because of the book, but for what you're doing in the recovery, for the recovery community and space. You know, you put out the good content that makes what we do shine in a very good light. So I'm very grateful for you and grateful for the opportunity.
Well, I am grateful to have you on the show. I really, when I got your email about your book, it just resonated so much with me, right? Our Happy Divorce, because I have such a great relationship with my ex-wife. You know, I was in the depths of my disease when I was married. So I just completely destroyed the marriage. I took full responsibility for that. But when I got clean and sober, all that was able to turn back around. I mean, it was through recovery that I was able to make amends and, you know, put our daughter first. Right. So that's, you know, when I saw that, I said, you know, absolutely. I mean, I could have written this book. So let's get Ben on. I think more people need to hear this. I think it's when we put the children first, and we work out our differences and we focus on our children and of course on our own personal development, growth and recovery, magic happens. Wouldn't you agree?
No question. And that's, you know, it's funny because I kind of have the, what do they call it? The fraud syndrome or the
imposter syndrome.
Imposter syndrome, because here I am talking about these principles of how I got through my divorce and how we, you know, got to a place of our happy divorce. And it's because of what I learned in the program. Now, the other question is, was it the alcohol and the drugs that ruined your relationship, right? Like yours and your behaviors. I didn't have that excuse, Omar. You know, I was a 12 years sober individual who had sort of stopped working on myself and doing the things I was supposed to do, and a dry drunk. Right. And so I didn't have the excuse that I could tell me, yeah, I was a raging alcoholic and a raging drug addict. That's why our marriage ended. No, it ended because I had stopped working on myself and I had stopped, you know, doing the things that I needed to do on a daily basis. So I didn't become, you know, that selfish person that can't take accountability for everything. So, you know, I had a strong foundation of recovery still. And so when my ex and I broke up, or I left the house, I was a raging dry drunk, and I was out to destroy Nikki, who's my ex, you know, show the world and our son what an imposter she was, what a fraud she was, or at least what I had thought she was, and it was all her fault. Right? It gets back to that point where, every alcoholic or drug addict has lost the ability to take accountability and blames everybody but themselves. And that's where I was, but I had enough tools, and this is why I wrote you the email, because this is a big problem in recovery, right? Is relationships. Romance and finance are the two big FU buttons that I see. And even the most sober people or the most spiritual people, when they go through a breakup, it is very difficult, right? It is very hard, but these tools work whether you're in the program, or whether you're not, right? Accountability and owning up to your side of the street.
Well, which brings up a very important question, and one that I always ask, is the idea of a morning routine and a spiritual practice. For me, I know that if I stop meditating in the morning, if I stop journaling, if I stop connecting with my higher power through prayer and meditation, I find that my day might be off, but continued, my weeks turn into nightmares. So I'd love to know, how do you, what does your morning routine look like? And does that include a spiritual practice?
Yes. I mean, when, exactly like you said, when I'm on my game, right? Or when I'm connected, I'm in that routine. And that usually starts off with, a prayer. Now, I'm not necessarily a knees guy. I usually sit there, and it's getting right, starting a new day, praying for to go through the day and not just think of myself, being aware of doing something nice for somebody else, and not telling anybody. That's the hard part for me, Omar. Is when I first got sober, my sponsor told me that I had to do something nice for somebody every day. I was like, hey, that's easy. And he goes, oh, but here's the thing, is you can't tell anybody. And then I realized, what the true intention of doing something nice for somebody, and I didn't have a problem with doing it, is that I told everybody, and then it becomes, a non-self, it becomes a selfish act instead of a selfless act. So I'm aware of that, and then I just sort of, quiet the mind down, because as soon as I wake up, it doesn't matter what happened the day before, my mind is going, my mind is racing. Now, I'd like to think part of it is ADHD, which, my mind is always racing, but for the most part, I'd be, convinced that even if I didn't have that, then my mind would be going. So it's just starting the day right. It's starting the day grounded, right? It's not all of a sudden, kids are running around, wife is running around, like everybody seems to be at me, but I need some time just to stay grounded, to get grounded, and then hopefully get through the day. Now, sometimes if I forget that, or if I do it, I need to reground myself sometimes during the day too. So it's not just a morning routine. Sometimes it's, during the day, in the middle of the day routine.
I totally get that. And, you can always restart your day. They always say that. But man, I will tell you, it's just a lot easier when you start your day intentionally, right? So let's dive into the book, and let's dive into really, way before the book, because it's the marriage. So here's what's really cool about being on a call like this one, because here's what happens: you get into recovery. And especially if it's 12-step recovery, and the first thing everybody tells you is don't get into a relationship right away. Okay. So don't get in a relationship in the first year, right? Make sure that you do all the work first on yourself, okay, before you jump into a relationship. So, at what point in your recovery did you meet your wife, and, how far along in the steps were you? Like, what was going on?
Well, it's interesting. So they told you, they told me exactly that. My sponsor said, don't get in a relationship. I was in a halfway house for men for 6 months, where we had group 2 times a week, and then we're supposed to go out and go to meetings the other time. And they, said, go to meetings, don't date for the first year, or don't get in a relationship. Go to meetings and find your higher power. So I did. And she was beautiful. And her name was Sita. And I had 60 days of sobriety and she had 8 years of sobriety. And I immediately jumped right into the relationship. And she was, my higher power. I'd walk into meetings and she was a beautiful woman. And here I was, just gave me that confidence. And I did everything wrong. So I wouldn't suggest that, because what happened was about 2 years into it, not only was she beautiful, but she also happened to be an exotic dancer. So that was a big test to my self-esteem, and which I wouldn't recommend. But at about 2 years of sobriety, she decided to leave me for another pupil or for another student that she could be a higher power for. And so all of a sudden, I found myself at 2 years of sobriety, sort of starting all over again. Now, the good thing about that, though, was at least she was active in the program, and we went to a lot of meetings. I went to my halfway house. I made it through that. So I worked with my sponsor. So I had a good foundation and a good support group. So when that, the higher power left, that I had something to fall back on. So, but it was that point that I reset. One thing that I didn't do, though, is I fully worked through the steps in those 2 years. And it wasn't until about 2.5 years sober that I did my first 4th step.
Wow.
Yeah. I fought this thing for a long time. I was 21 years old, still sort of suffering from terminal uniqueness, but getting by because of the fellowship, and getting by because I had found a great group of, guys to hang out with and have fun with. And I learned that I could have fun again. But anyway, so I got through the steps, really had that moment. I started working with other guys. And then I think it was about 4 years sober. I was working in a nightclub, managing a nightclub, which, probably isn't the best thing. But the good thing about that nightclub is everybody in the management, ownership, even from the bar manager to the head of security, all sober. So she came in one night, my ex-wife, and we met. And I was in a much different place. I was in a place where I was learned to love myself. I learned what it meant to be not just abstinent from drinking and sort of riding that pink cloud that I had for so long. Having a beautiful woman sort of allowed my pink cloud to, I guess, maybe last a little longer than normal.
Mm-hmm.
But when I came crashing down, it was forced me to do some work. And that's unfortunately the story of my recovery. It is that I get desperate or I get motivated when I'm at the bottom, or when I'm in enough pain. But for the grace of God, I haven't had a drink in 25 years, but it's taken a lot of pain to get to, the motivation to change. So I was there, I did the work. I was a much different person than I was. It's amazing, quickly, in about 2 years, and especially being able to work with other men in the rooms and helping them and seeing their, guiding them through the work. And so I met Nikki, and I was ready for a relationship, but the problem was I wasn't honest with myself or her about, after, sort of, there's a difference, right? You meet somebody, you're sort of in lust with them, and it's new and everything's great. And, she thinks you watching SportsCenter every night is the cutest thing in the world. And she can accept everything about you. And you love everything about her and can accept, and then, sort of time passes and all that. And then what happened with Nikki and I is that it was clear that we loved each other. I mean, we were great friends. We didn't have this like terrible, awful fighting relationship. This is even when we're dating. This is before we got married. But God was just putting all these red lights in front of us, right? All these red, big flashing stop lines or railroad, warning gates or whatever. And we just went right through them.
What were some of those red lights?
I think after the lust had worn off, the passion, the chemistry, sexual chemistry wasn't there. I think that the idea of being motivated to do things together, like going to see a movie. We'd much rather have friends around or do something with her parents or my parents. There was some big breakups, right? Or there'd be some breakups, and then we'd get back together because of the fear of being alone, and the fear of going through the hurt on my end. Like I didn't want to do that again. And so it was just easier to get back together. And then her parents decided to move to Florida, and um, something inside of me just knew that I shouldn't do it. Right? It wasn't. I was at that age where 26, 25, 26, and it was about 2 years after we met, and I was in love with the whole idea, right? The marriage, her family was great, the lifestyle was great, and I made that decision, knowing in the back of my head that I really didn't want to do it. I shouldn't do it, right? And so that's another warning sign. But I made that decision, and then I resented the hell out of her when I got here because couldn't be more different. So I moved to Tampa from San Francisco, and it couldn't be more different. Tampa at the time than San Francisco. I mean, 180 degrees in the other direction.
Well, and also just to be clear, so you're in California, you've got a job that you love. Okay, everyone in the place is sober.
Mm-hmm.
So you're working with people that are in sobriety. You've got a strong support.
Very strong. Yeah.
The community is rock solid.
Yep.
Okay. So you have this very strong recovery base. 4 years sober. Okay. Everything is aces as far as recovery goes. And then you meet the woman of your dreams, kind of. And then
at the time,
you thought it was the woman of your dreams.
Right.
And there's these things running through your head, like when the right thing to do is move to Florida. She's moving over there. I guess that's the right thing to do. I should do that. Her parents are great. So you started selling yourself on the idea.
Yeah. And here, although the community was great, my sobriety was great, which it was, there were some things that I wasn't honest with. I never told anybody. I mean, my sponsor back then, still a really close friend. And I've told him things that, we tell our sponsors, right, that we would normally go to our graves with. But I wasn't honest with him about the process, right, or what I was feeling. So look, at the end of the day, that's what part of the work that I had to do after the fact and clean up that is that I didn't, although, I was really, really working, I was 5 meeting a week guy. I was, sponsoring guys, 4 or 5, like you said, I had 30 guys that I could call anytime, any place, anywhere, and they would come running, right? I had that. I was in the middle of the boat. But, it's so much more I've learned over the past, however many years. It's not what we do in the hour of the meeting or the hour at the coffee shop with the sponsor or the sponsee. It's what happens in the other, 23, 22, whatever hours of the day, right? And so that's where I hadn't worked. I could have used the program and I could have used the tools to avoid it. But again, nothing happens in God's world by mistake. And if you could give me a crystal ball right now, Omar, and have me go back to that time and change that and have me talk to the sponsor, get honest with myself back then, I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't take you up on it because it turned me into, what I am today. And it's a much better version of it. It took some time, took some work.
There's no question. All right. So, but I wanted the listeners to get the full picture. So now you move over to Florida and tell us what happens then. Because, here's the thing. I've got to get a job. I've got to get a place. I've got to reestablish myself in recovery. So what was your move when you moved over to Florida?
So, part of the thing was the job was already taken care of. The move and the place we decided to live, again, she and she was here, she'd say that she is a daddy's girl. She's very close with her family. And they moved to a golfing community. There's like downtown Tampa and then sort of the suburbs. And so her family moved to this golfing community up in the suburbs, and Nikki wanted to buy a house in this in this community. So I moved right from the heart of San Francisco to this golfing community with no sidewalks. It was so cool. I remember the first night I was there, and being wide awake, just going, why is it so quiet? Like I had grown up with noise around me all my life. And so I go to a meeting. I go to a couple meetings, but every meeting's a discussion meeting. And in San Francisco, they were, majority, if not all of them, were speaker for the first half, qualifier, and then discussion. These were all discussion meetings. And a lot of them I went to, probably looking back, they weren't, but just the mindset I was in, where they were jelly donut meetings, I call them, where somebody gets up there and shares about how they went to buy a donut, and they bought a jelly donut, and there wasn't enough jelly in their donut. So they didn't know what to do, and they wanted more jelly. And so it's just like this all problem. But it really, what it was they did it differently, right? It didn't, but what, it was the same 12 steps. It was the same book. It was the same, things. I just was used to a certain, format of a meeting. That's all. But because of that, I said they do it differently. They do this program differently than where I was, and it was bad. And so, I went to meetings, and I sort of audited AA, I would say, where in San Francisco, I was, in the middle of the boat. But when I moved to Tampa, I would go to meetings so I could call my sponsor back in San Francisco and say, I'm going to meetings. But it's like, 1 or 2 a week, not really doing the thing that really got me sober, was hanging out 15 minutes before the meeting and then hanging out hours after the meeting. I was in and out. And so, auditing AA. And so, one thing about this deal is, and it says in the promise, is it has half measures avail us nothing. And it's a lot of things in life. You can do half measures and get half results, right? I can go to the gym and I can do 6 reps instead of 12, and I'll get the, results of 6 reps. Or if I want to lose 30 pounds, but I only eat, lose 15, I'll lose 15. But half measures in this 12-step program does not give you half results. It gives you nothing.
Gives you
right?
nothing.
It gives you nothing. And so I got nothing. And so I started ending, slowly. This, again, the path to dry drunkenness isn't an overnight thing, right? It's like the path to a relapse isn't an overnight thing. The relapse is actually the end of a relapse, not the beginning when you pick up. But so I started sort of pulling away. I kept on justifying why it was different. And then all of a sudden, when looking back on it, all of a sudden my life started getting more complicated, right? I started resenting Nikki for moving me to Florida. Like she, effing put a gun to my head and said, we're moving to Florida. You're coming or I'm going to kill you, right? So, I started blaming her. I stopped going to meetings, and the results were not good.
So here's something really to remember, right? We're human beings. And when we forget that we're humans, when we forget that we have emotions and feelings, and we have an authentic calling and an authentic self that needs to be acknowledged. When that doesn't happen, a revolt ensues, rebellion.
So well said.
Rebellion ensues. And so what happens is there's this part of you that says, this is the right move. She's the right girl. That's the right family. This is the right thing to do. There's the other part of you that's screaming, are you out of your mind? Right. Why would we leave? We have this perfect thing going. We have all these things. Check, 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 check. Wait, we're leaving this for that? Okay. As soon as you land, the rebellion begins. So it could be great meetings with great people, but the other person is like, fuck this. These people suck. This place
Yeah.
is ridiculous. I can't believe you actually thought we would be happy here. This is too quiet here. This is not our people. This is not our vibe. And so it's just, here's all the lists here. Now I have a whole checklist of all the reasons why I shouldn't be here, why I'm unhappy, and I'm
And it's
probably
none of my fault. And
it's
it,
not.
right,
Yeah.
the captain or the general of the, I love your analogy, right? The general of that riot is self-will,
Uh-huh.
right? I mean, that is the commander in chief of that
Commander in
riot.
chief of the rebellion.
Yeah, a rebellion, absolutely. I mean, because that's what it was, right? It was.
Uh-huh.
Look, going back on it, we weren't in love, and I wouldn't make this like if we were in love, truly in love with each other, then that decision would have been fine, right?
Yep.
Then that decision would, but it just wasn't made out of being in love. It was made for all of the wrong reasons.
Well, you were looking for something, and I don't
Mm.
know, so many
Mm.
years later, you guys were married for 10 years, and right, you were married for 10 years?
We didn't quite make it to 10. I think we got married in 2001. We had our son in 2003, and we got divorced about 2007. So 6 or 7.
Okay, 6 or 7
Yeah.
years you were married, and then now you guys have been divorced. Oh, I think you guys have been divorced a decade.
Yeah. We've been divorced for close to 13 years.
Okay, so we're talking like 20 years,
Yeah,
close to 20 years.
I've lived in Tampa exactly 20 years. We moved Y2K, January 1st, 2020.
Okay.
Or 2000.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, yeah, the question, right? You were looking for something.
Right.
Something was missing where you were currently at. Did you discover later on what it is you were looking for, why you made the move, why you thought that was the right move versus staying?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that is, the whole right inside of me.
Mhm.
And it's a spiritual hole.
Mhm.
I have tried to fill it with chemicals, alcohol, sex, shopping,
Mhm.
money, whatever it is. And
Mhm.
so the hole was, if only I had this, right? If only what I was searching for was something else besides a spiritual solution to a spiritual problem, right? And so when what I was looking for was, her family was very well off, and I got blinded by that. I was addicted to that, the notoriety of her family's name, the jets, the lifestyle, the whole. And so it's amazing what I was willing to sacrifice for that, including decisions that put my family in the back seat, right? Or ask them to take a back seat because I'm going with Nikki's family to this or to this. So yes, I what I was searching for was something other than a spiritual solution, to the spiritual problem I had.
Wow. That is so beautiful. And I mean, this is why I asked that question. I always ask that question. Tell me about your spiritual condition, your spiritual practice. If you don't have one, it doesn't matter what you acquire in your life, it will never be enough, because nothing will ever fill that God-shaped hole except for God. So
Yeah.
when and then such an important question, you have all of this going for you, but there was something missing. I hadn't developed my spiritual condition.
Yep. And I hadn't learned to love myself either, right? And I hadn't
Yeah.
done, I mean, even at, 5-6 years sobriety, I thought I had, right? I thought I had, I guess the spiritual awakening for me has sort of been an evolving one, or what it truly means to love myself, and the definition of loving myself. And, like I said earlier in this podcast, was after the work, when I broke up with, my higher power, the exotic dancer, is I had done the work and I thought I was ready to sort of, move on. And then I got lust and love, mixed up. And,
Yep.
And so it's an evolving. And let me tell you, if you're listening to this and you're new, or you're listening to this and you're trying to find that, solution, let me tell you something. 25 years sober, I've tried it all, Omar. I've tried to go around every problem or every, spiritual hurdle, instead of going through it and work, if my first reaction is, how can I go around this?
Yep.
How can I, what can I take? What can I do? Who can I sleep with? What can I buy? Whatever it is, instead of, just saying this is a process. I mean, I don't know if it changes for me personally, but my first instinct I think I'm just wired to like, okay, how can I get through this quickly? How can I get through this pain? How can I get through this discomfort quickly? And that's that's why I became a heroin addict. I think is there's no quicker way of feeling better than sticking a needle in your arm and getting that quicker. So that's the way I'm wired. Now I've learned over the years that it takes time, and there's no timeline for healing. There's no timeline for getting through to the other side. But one thing I know that's guaranteed is you'll get to the other side.
Yes.
Eventually
you'll get to the other side, but I haven't talked to anyone who's gotten to the other side and been happy, joyous, and free without connecting with that spiritual part.
No question.
Because otherwise there's still something missing.
No.
There's always going to be something missing. Doesn't matter how much they do, how much they grow. If they haven't found a way to connect in that way, something's just, I'm just waiting for that one more thing. It's just, if it's just that, it's that constant. So I totally get it. Right. But so now just take us into, now you're married and you realize,
oh shit.
Right. I'm in this thing, right? But you have a baby in there as well. So what was going on in your head at the time where I get married, the oh shit moment, we're going to have a baby, and then finally, ultimately lead us up until that last year to 6 months?
Well, so I think that, part of it was you talk about that, the part missing. And what we were always doing, Nikki and I, was either trying to be in love with the person we wanted the other person to be, or who the person said they were going to be, and vis-a-vis change, right? Like I said, I changed this about me, and then, but the oh shit moment, and I guess pun intended, but the most sobering moment was, I remember one day I was driving home from work, and I opened the garage door, and it almost seemed like it was in slow motion, because I remember the thought was like, I hope I don't see her car there.
Ooh.
And Omar, we weren't fighting. Like we
I get it. Mm-hmm.
We weren't in a bad fight, or we weren't like, it was that moment where I remember it, that I hope I don't see her car, because then I don't have to interact with it. I don't have to deal with it. Right. And so, but yet we trudged along, and some things happened, and we, again, sort of like our relationship, I said, I can't do this anymore. I'm moving back to Florida. You're not or moving back to San Francisco. You're not the person. And then we decided to have a kid, because that's going to fix it. Right.
You went from I'm leaving to let's have a baby. Right. Listeners, I want to listen closely to this.
Yeah. Play that on rewind, right?
Play that.
Because that's going to fix it, right? That's the thinking, right? That's the living in the future, right? That's the not living in the present and trying to do something, because that's going to make a difference, right? As you said, if I get this, if I make this amount of money, if I do this, and all these expectations. And, she knew that I wanted to have a baby. She knew that I wanted to have children. She wasn't really, I think she wanted to, but she wasn't ready. And then we'd break up, and she'd sort of say, okay, let's have a baby. And so I'd come back, and we'd have a baby, and where you had a baby. And look, best thing that ever happened either. And it worked, it worked for a little bit. Our relationship was probably never better than it was after our son was born.
Well, that's because you became parents and you stopped being husband and wife.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it's a really good point. I mean, it was thinking that way, but eventually that wore off, and eventually it got to a point where, although it wasn't her fault, but I was an angry person that was always blaming her. Right. And she was doing all these things, and she was starting a jewelry company in LA, and she was spending a lot of time in LA. And, of course I had a problem with that because she was probably messing around. I mean, or whatever. And then it was just one day that she had said to me one more time, um, I want to take this seriously. I want to work on us. I love you. I'm not, we're going to make this work. And all the things that she did with her words, right. And all the things that she had done before. And then I was staying at a hotel at the time. And I came home to get some stuff. She was in LA, and I came home to get a bag. And my wife, or ex-wife, wife at the time, is like legendary for calendars. This is before the iPhone, but she still is. She has these printed calendars, and she puts all these dates and colors and stuff. And it was always on our fridge. And I had seen, it was a new month, and I went and I looked at it, and it was like 6 times that month that she was going to be in LA after we had this conversation, a week before. And it just hit me, that that was the moment where I knew that it was over. But it wasn't over like, it wasn't over like everything's great now. It was over like, screw you. This is exactly why we're not getting married. I'm going to show the world exactly with the fraud. And I left angry, resentful, bitter, everything you can think of an active alcoholic, except for I wasn't drinking. And so, I went out and I hired this big fancy lawyer, or did my research, right? Because I was going to find somebody that was going to help me
destroy her,
obtain my goal of destroying her.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I met with a few, and it wasn't until I met with one that was giving me everything I wanted to hear, and was buying into, or I was buying into everything he was saying. And he was just feeding the fire, and wrote him a big check. Take a look at the prenup. And a couple of days later, he wrote me War and Peace. It was like 30 pages of, Nikki actually jokes that he probably just changed the name, and it's the standard one he uses for all his clients. But, I didn't read it for some reason. And this is sort of maybe like there was still a little bit of
God left in there.
There was still a little bit left in the tank there, Omar. And I literally, like 2 weeks, I carry this backpack around everywhere. It's sort of like my Linus blanket. And I had it in there. And I didn't read it. And I was on a plane back from LA, and I decided to take it out. And I opened it. It was a red eye, so everybody was asleep on it. It was sort of like a surreal, like, movie moment. It's very dramatic. And I started reading it, and I got like 2 pages into it. And for the first time in a long time, Omar, and years, I got honest with myself, and I saw the person that I was, not who I thought I was, but the person I actually was, within those 2 pages. And I don't know what happened. Like, I don't know what or why. I think a lot had to do with my parents' divorce, and it was not a happy divorce. And I was amazingly, after all that, willing to put my son through the same nonsense that I had been through. And maybe that was it. And I knew where that path ended, right? I knew what kind of pain and hurt, that path ended in, and I put it away. I didn't read it again. And I called him on Monday, and I said, I'm going to go a different direction. Can you please kindly send me the remainder of my retainer? And I got a couple of weeks there for like $220 conveniently. But anyway, so I called up Nikki.
You got what? What was that? How much?
It was like 200 and some, $200 of a pretty major retainer.
That was the only
left. That was what was left.
That's what was left. You asked for your retainer back. And he said, okay, well, after writing that out, what's left
is what's left. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
A couple $100.
Oof.
So, he was disappointed because he saw this thing as an annuity that was going to pay off for a couple of years. But anyways, I called Nikki, and I said, look, I realize that I have some shortcomings, and I realize that I'm not the person that I want to be, nor am I the person that is capable of going through a divorce right now. I'm not in the right time frame. Now, that doesn't mean we're getting back together, right? That just means that and she's not sober, but she knew enough of what that meant. And so what I did was I got back to basics, man. I just, I tucked my ego between my tail, and I started going to 90 and 90. I worked with my sponsor. We went through the steps, especially the step around Nikki, you know.
Did you go back to San Francisco? You stayed in Florida.
Stayed in Florida, yeah. Yeah, that was never an option. I mean, well, afterward, I actually thought about it when I left Nikki, because now I had my chance. But after the work, I realized, look, you got to face your consequences, you know, and your consequences, your decisions was to have this beautiful child, and you can't leave him and be a dad 3,000 miles away.
Right.
So that's the beauty. That's the beauty of the process, right? Or at least the end result of it.
Now, the sponsor, was it your old sponsor or was it a Florida sponsor?
It was a Florida sponsor. So
you actually, the reason why I asked is super important.
Yeah.
Because that's when you know the humility kicked in.
Yeah.
Because I'm not holding on to my whoopee back in San Francisco. It's like I'm owning the fact that I'm here. I know what I need to do, and I'm going to have to go all in, or what's the point?
Right. Right.
Okay.
Yeah. And the not the ironic thing, but the thing is, I had gotten that sponsor when I left the house, and started going back to meetings. But again, not getting honest, right? And not, look, raising my hand and saying I'm in a lot of pain and I'm suffering, and I'm going through this divorce and about to split, and so being honest on that level, but not really honest on, my part in that level or the ending of the relationship. So I got a sponsor, but then we started working together, and we got right into the 4-step, and it was clear to me, man, a couple of, what are you resentful at? And then, it was clear. And especially after when I read it to him, it was even clearer, probably about a quarter of the way into it, that, you know what, I wouldn't want to be married to that asshole either. I was not a very happy husband. I wasn't the husband I thought I was. I wasn't the father I thought I was. And it was just amazing how blind I was, to my actions and my part. And then, I called Nikki up and I asked her to coffee. She had also been going to therapy too. But again, I went to that coffee shop with no preconceived expectations of what was going to happen after I did my amends. Right. This is where I think the line is very, at least for me, clear on what we have to, our intentions on going in and making that amends. They might not turn out the way we want. They might, because the thing is, we can't want anything out of it except for, to get it get it off. Just needed to get it off my chest. I needed to tell her. And I apologized, and I told her I loved her, and I told her that, the work that I'd done, and I just wasn't the person that I thought I was. And I took it all out on you, and it wasn't fair to you. And I blamed you for decisions that I made. And, humbly, I made them sober. Like didn't make these decisions all hopped up on whatever or drunk. These were sober minded decisions. And so, I apologized to her. In turn, she apologized to me. And we joke, and I don't even know if it's a joke at this point, because it's kind of true. It's the first time and only time we've apologized to each other. I remember driving home one day, and Nikki and I, we were married, and we were in a huge fight. And I was talking to my friend Martin, and I was like, Martin, I realized afterwards that I was wrong. And I could not say I was sorry. I forgot to, even though I knew I was wrong, Omar, I said, Martin, I couldn't say I was sorry. I was, was just so caught up in myself and so caught up in, whatever blindness, that I just couldn't say my sorry. So, and she's the same way, but it completely changed everything from that moment on. The next question, actually wasn't the next question. That was all we talked about at that coffee shop. We didn't talk about divorce. We didn't talk about any custody thing. It was just a clearage of the wreckage of the past. And from both of our side. And it was also acknowledgement that this relationship is no one's fault. There is no villain in this relationship. We both took ownership for the ending of it, as just as we should the success of our divorce. right? It takes two to make it. It takes two to break it. And that's why in the book, we don't go into the gory details. We don't talk about what happened. If you're looking for a book about, who did what or who didn't do what or whatever, you're not going to find it because it doesn't matter. We didn't focus on that. We cleaned up the past. We owned what we did. We owned how we had hurt the other person. And then it's amazing what happens from there. When you have that true amends and you have that true moment, it's like the gates, like it didn't, I don't want to make something clear. It didn't all of a sudden become our happy divorce, but now there was so much more room to move. It wasn't like this tunnel vision or this thing that was sucking us dry. It like it had been lifted. And I think that everybody, whether you're sober or not, humans have the ability, the right, and the capacity to be happy. We all do. But the only place I think that happens, at least in my experience, is in the present. And we could never, and we talk about our happy divorce, it could never be a happy divorce if we didn't clean up the wreckage of the past. And we didn't live with that past haunting over us or make decisions off that past or whatever. And we left it at the coffee shop. Sort of. I mean, it's not like it just dropped there.
No,
but
and listen, there's obviously lots of wreckage, but when you
Right.
talk about that, I can feel it. Like I can picture you guys at that coffee shop, both of you relieved every minute that went by going, oh my God, I'm being heard for the first time. Oh my God, I'm being
Yeah.
heard for the first time. And I'm actually listening as well. So there is this beautiful synergistic moment where you guys are both, finally on the same page. Finally on the same page for the first time. So there's this kind of recognition that we never should have gotten married. Like we
Right.
never should have gotten married. Okay. And so she had that rebellion inside of her as well.
And for her, just for her, it's such a big deal because she's a fixer, right? She is like, she has the opposite of my experience. Her parents married 52 years. So she wants to do everything to fix it. And for a while there, she even wanted to stay, like we talked about earlier, she wanted to make it work. She kept on wanting to make it work and wouldn't give up or wouldn't surrender that it didn't work. But at that moment, she did.
Yeah, but that's just because you've got that's part of the conscious mind. Okay.
Yeah.
So you've got your conscious mind. She's got her conscious mind. She's got the programming from watching her parents.
Right.
Okay. But deep down inside, both of you guys authentically, there is that version of you that's like, no, this is not right. What are you doing? Get out. And so it gets worse and worse and worse. And when you guys came together, you both were coming together for the same purpose, which was to find a way to dissolve this marriage, to dissolve this marriage without ruining the other person, honoring your child, okay, and moving on in the most healthy way.
Right. And I think that, a lot of people in recovery can appreciate that because, we can't move forward. That's the whole point, at least the reason we have this awakening is because we cleaned up the past. The best is, sometimes new things come up, but we cannot live our lives in the past. Right. And so, or the future, right? Because that's fear, right? And we have no control over that. But the singleness of purpose, and that's where I talk about the imposter syndrome, right? Is that all these tools that I use because we didn't know where to go from there, right? There wasn't, as crazy as it sounds, there wasn't Facebook or Instagram or support groups or podcasts like yours where people can go and get some relatedness and get some advice. There was MySpace, but there weren't divorce co-parenting support groups on MySpace. I don't think.
No,
but just a lot of crappy music. But and so we, sort of just figured it out. There was this new practice in Florida called collaborative, but it wasn't really part of the statute, and there's only a few lawyers doing it. So we sort of figured this thing out on our own, and took the singleness of purpose, right? Primary purpose. In 12 steps to stay sober. Our primary purpose was our son and his happiness and not to burden him with the decisions of his parents. when he had nothing to do with any of it. Innocent bystander. And so many times those innocent bystanders are weaponized, are used as blocking and tackling tools, and are faced and are given a big fat emotional bill at the end of it to pay, right? And they didn't order off the menu. They didn't order anything. So that was our singleness of purpose. Primary purpose was to make sure that 2 + 2 = 4 for Asher. We tried to keep it as simple as possible. And so decisions on joint custody, that was my main thing. I asked her, I said, do you have any problem with joint custody, at our second meeting at the coffee shop, by the way, same coffee shop, same place, same table. And she said, absolutely not. I said, you know what, all the other shit we can work out. We'd hired collaborative lawyers. And I said, you know what, let's just see where we agree with that, singleness of purpose or that primary purpose. And it's amazing, man. We figured the whole thing out. And this wasn't some, small, we had businesses together and, a house and, there's some complicated finances with it. But when we had the primary purpose of 2 + 2 has to equal 4 for Asher, in divorce world, like 2 + 2 can come up with a bunch of different answers for different people, right? With decisions. But it always had to equal 4 for Asher. And sometimes the decisions felt like, man, that answer was like 1,000 for me, because it was usually the ones that affected my ego, right? Her dating somebody else, or another guy around my kid or whatever. But in the beginning, before all that, it was just 2 + 2 = 4. So where we were going to live, how we were going to split custody, the financial stuff, everything was based around that. And it sort of just fell into place, and it wasn't easy. And I use the expression all the time, because we did it. We faked it till we made it. When we put on our big boy pants and didn't want those awkward drop-offs, didn't want everybody around us, but most importantly, our son, to have that palpable tension in the air when you're around two parents, divorced parents that don't get along. Everybody feels it,
right?
But much less the kids. So that was our primary purpose, man.
So now the coffee shop moment happens, and you guys go through your divorce, and now let's fast forward into your new relationship, her new relationship, the new kids, right? So at first you have no idea that this is coming, that you're going to have this beautiful full family that includes your ex-wife and her husband and your wife,
my kids, right? The whole deal.
Right. So how does that, how does that happen? How does that look? First, so here's what happened next. And then we decided to write this book.
Well, it's funny, because I don't know if you had ever went through the practice or whatever of writing down early in sobriety what you felt your life would be like in 5 years or 10 years or whatever. But I did that.
I did.
Yeah, I did that. And let me tell you something. I way underestimated what my life was going to look like, right? And so if you had asked us after the coffee shop meetings, after the multiple coffee shop meetings, where we actually worked out the whole agreement and then handed it to the lawyer and said, draw this up. This is what we've agreed upon. And it's funny, because the amount I paid my collaborative divorce was almost half of what I paid the guy to write the freaking War and Peace memo, right? And so anyways, but so if you had asked us 12 years ago, 13 years ago, it was literally like, we just want to be in the same room. Like, we could never have imagined our life the way it is today. And so it's another example of, like, if you put people, take the self out of it and do, something, do the right thing, are committed to that purpose, right? Our son, look, right out of the gate, Nikki started dating somebody we knew, right? Somebody that was our friend while we were married. And that was like, okay, God's like, I'm going to test you now. You are this big new now spiritual, giant, and have this like, primary purpose. Try this one on for size. And so, I remember I was coaching Asher's Little League, and there was one game, and it was the first time that Chad, Nikki's husband now, came around. And after the game, Asher ran over and gave Nikki a hug and gave Asher a hug. And I sort of sauntered over there, like really slow. And I mean, my stomach, as you can imagine, my guts, my inside were just tearing each other apart. And I remember just thinking to myself, okay, what's best for Asher? What's best for it? Like, and putting my big boy pants on, smiling. I probably looked as fake as you could probably imagine, but I did it, and I got through it. And I gave him a hug. I shook his hand. I gave him a hug just to let Asher know, hey, this is cool. This is cool. I'm okay with this. Meanwhile, I'm like, because that, again, 2 + 2 in that situation, definitely, I couldn't find 4 if you give me a calculator, but so eventually, it just sort of evolved, right? And then it got to the point where he calls me one day, and he says, "Will you meet me for coffee?" And I said, "Oh yeah, of course I will." And ironically, we went to the same coffee shop, same Starbucks, sat at the same table. And he said he was sorry. He didn't but he wanted to make it clear that he didn't mean for this to happen. It wasn't like he was waiting for the body to get dry or body to get cold or whatever they say, but he just wanted to make sure that I knew that he respected me. He wasn't trying to be Asher's dad. He understood that. And so he made amends to me. And then he asked me if it was okay for him to marry Nikki. He hadn't asked her yet. And look, I spent 10 minutes trying to convince him not to, for his own good, not because I didn't want him around my kid. But
stop it! You didn't. I was like, "What a beautiful story!" Like, right, wow. And then he's like, "Don't do it.
Don't do it." No, I said, "Are you sure?" That I didn't spend 5 minutes. I said, "Are you sure?" Because I can tell you some stories. But I said, "Of course, man." And look, at the end of the day, he was going to do it anyways. But right then in that moment, it was like what Nikki and I had accomplished had rubbed off on him enough to understand that he was going to be part of this deal, and that, like it or not, I was a part of that deal, and he was willing to accept it, and he was willing to become into our, what Nikki and I had worked so hard to achieve, and not be a disruptive force, but be an addition, right? And what can you say at that point? Like, even if
listen, I'm surprised he didn't break into tears, because I'll tell you, man, it takes a special kind of man,
right?
Takes a special kind of humility to go to an ex-husband who he's got absolutely there's nothing in the rule books that says you need to go ask your ex, your girlfriend's ex-husband if it's okay, right? Like, that is, for me, an evolved man.
No question. No, and so, like, right, exactly. So, and it's funny you say tears, because I've been able now to tell the story, because I've told it so many times since the book came out, without breaking into tears, because I used to always do it.
Good,
right? So, but at that point, it's like, even if I would, like, you can't sell enough bullshit to justify why this guy shouldn't be in my son's life, right? At the end of the day, Nikki was going to be with somebody.
Right.
All I can ask, or all I can wish, is that he doesn't hurt my son. My son loves him as much as I do, and that he makes Nikki happy. And right. So, like, obviously, like, you don't even know the guy, but he checks all those boxes by just that thing. And he has the whole time. So I can, the ego, right, of another man around my son, like, it's not easy. It's still hard to this day. When Asher and Chad do something together, it's still sort of like, oh, another guy. I mean, this is after writing a book and Our Happy Divorce. I'd be lying to you if I said that first reaction is a little, like, a little gut check. But it's sort of like sobriety. You just sort of learn to handle those and to process them. But I'd be lying if I said they didn't exist. So, and then my wife, Nikki knew that I was going to be doing, sowing some wild oats. She's more of a, monkey branch relationship. And she knew that I was sort of going to be going buck wild. And she asked me, she said, you know what? I just asked you to make sure that you're sure before you make any introductions to our son. Now, this is another example, because if I'm in my ego and 2 + 2 = 4 for me, I'm telling my ex-wife, who the hell are you to tell me who I can't and can't bring around my son? Right? That's my decision. But she's right. It's not a good thing for him to have this revolving door of a Mercedes and Diamond and Crystal and all the other ones that I was bringing, in the house. And so I said, you're right, I won't. And so it wasn't, I think it was about a year before Nadia, my wife, met Asher, a year of us dating. And, Nikki and Nadia, and this is another beautiful moment. Nikki knew that Nadia and I were spending time together. She knew that I had introduced Asher to her. And every night when Asher was at my house, I would get his mom on the phone so he could say goodnight. And Nadia was sitting on the couch, and Asher said, "Hey, mommy, have you met Nadia?" And Nikki goes, "No, honey, but I've heard of her." And he goes, "Here, talk to her." And he put the phone up to Nadia's face and he said, "You know what? It's time. It's time you two met. I know that how important mom is in my life. I understand that, but I see how important Nadia is to my dad's life, and it's time those two met." So the introduction, the first time they talked, was precipitated by my son.
Wow.
And I wish I had a camera, because if I could I'll never forget it, but I want the world to see Nadia's face when he stuck that phone in her face. I was like, oh shit. And they have a great relationship today. Maybe it's the power of relatedness, and they both understand what it's like to be married to me, and it's like a support group. they have their, Ben Anonymous or whatever, but they have a great relationship, and Nikki relies on her a lot for parenting advice. Nadia and I have had 2 kids, but they formed a beautiful relationship and are best friends. And so I can't figure it out, Omar. Like, I can't tell you that this is what I thought it was going to turn out, because I'd be lying, because I couldn't even imagine it. But it is absurd at the same time as beautiful, right? It is something that we have a hard time explaining to people. Was sort of the reason behind the book, actually, because people were like, we would post stuff on Facebook. We put out Christmas cards together instead of doing, 2 cards to the same people. We said, F it, let's just do 1 card and send it to everybody. So we started doing that. We started doing family trips, and we, post on social media like people do. And people are like, what? Like, how do you guys do it? But then other people be like, you're such an inspiration. Like,
yes.
your story's so great.
Yes.
And that's where sort of the program came in, right? Is like, I have a very, I've learned the most in my life and made the most change, if not necessarily from people with a lot of initials behind their names, but it wasn't until I sat across from another alcoholic or addict, and I knew that they had been to hell and had been in my chair, did my ears perk up and take a listen, and so the idea that, somebody knows the relatedness, somebody knows what it's like to be in hell, it was the best to lead me out of hell. Right. So, but I couldn't write the book by myself. It just didn't work. Like, it didn't work for me, because it takes 2 to make it. It takes 2 to break it. And so I sort of had to. Nikki's a little bit more reserved. She's not as open or with it. She likes to be reserved. So that, that's her personality. So I finally convinced her to do it. It took 4 years. We did it, but that was the motivation behind it, was to let people know this is real, first of all, but this is how we did it. And our happy divorce doesn't have to look as absurd as ours, but the idea of, somebody reading it, yes, it is absurd, but it's no more absurd than me sitting in my first week of meetings and somebody getting a chip for 30 days or somebody getting a chip for 60 days or somebody getting a chip for 5 years. I thought they were all fucking lying, because there's no way I could ever imagine not drinking for 30 days, not using drugs for 30 days, much less 5, 10, 15, 20 years. So, we did it and again, imposter syndrome, but we did it one day at a time, and we did it with a primary purpose.
Well, there's so many facets to this. So it's making ASHAIR the primary purpose gives you the focal point. But, the ego is powerful, and the ego gets, takes the hit, watches ASHAIR with the boyfriend, then with the husband. And there's this natural, almost, genetically coded male instinct to be a dick.
No question. Yeah.
And to be possessive and to, constantly, it's okay for me, it's not okay for her, that kind of thing. But we talked about this early on in the interview, which is I was trying to fill a God-shaped hole with all of these things. As soon as I allow God into my life, and as soon as I allow God to guide me, there is a filter that comes up. The ego, immediately goes into revolt. It wants to retaliate. And I've developed a relationship with God, and a little filter comes in and says, whoa, it's okay. It's okay, man. Remember, 2 + 2 = ASHAIR. And so I have to believe that when you are able to make that 2 + 2 = ASHAIR, it's God coming in and preventing you from pushing the detonator button.
Exactly. Right. And right. But the opposite of the ego is the humility. Right.
Yeah.
And that's when I'm in that place, is when I'm willing to at least let God in, or at least to realize that the ego glasses are a lot different than when I'm wearing the humility glasses.
Well, here's the thing. It's not going anywhere.
Right.
The ego's not going anywhere. It's never going to go anywhere. And so left unchecked, okay, you become that dry drunk again. What you did was you reconnected. You went back into the 90 and 90s, got yourself a sponsor, got honest, okay, did the work, right? And voila, like all of a sudden it's like, wow, I don't know what happened. I know what happened. You got right. You got right with God, you got right with your program, and all of a sudden there is God helping you.
Yeah.
He is, because you're watching it in real time happening. You're watching the chaos in your head going on in your head. It's like, and it's like, okay, let it pass. Let it pass. And I have to believe always that when I'm in that place where I can find a way to communicate effectively with the ego and connect with humility, it has to be because my conscious contact with my higher power is strong.
It absolutely has to be. It absolutely has to be. And that's, one thing that over the course of the years that I've been sober, is there's a clear difference between a connected Ben and an unconnected Ben.
Mm-hmm. Same
right. And right. And I think everybody, right. And once, look, wrecked a marriage, right? I mean, I've had problems with relationships, personal relationship, work relationship, and it always comes back to where my condition is. And I can almost 100%, tell you that the bad, when they've gone bad, or when, I'm pointing the finger at somebody else, I am not connected, or I've done something, I've strayed off the path, and gotten disconnected. And so, but the thing about the divorce is just like sobriety is, and this is really why, I wrote an email to you, because look, romance and finance are the two fuck you buttons, I think, for the mass population, right? But especially for alcoholics and addicts, right? It is the two. Yes. It is the two. I've seen more people go out about it. I've seen more people, be unhappy about it. I've seen people who are the most spiritual giants in the world who still go to meetings, who have a bad divorce and stay mad and carry that resentment around. And you know, financial insecurity will leave us, right? And I used to think that means that, hey, A is going to give me 12 steps are going to give the 12-step program are going to give me cash and prizes,
Right.
right? This is what the brochure says. You know, if I get sober, I'm going to have cash. And then I got all the cash and prizes and I was miserable, you know, and what I've learned, you know, what that taught me was that it's not about how much money you have. It's about being okay with where you are.
Absolutely.
You know, and being in the present, and not always, if only I had this, or I should have done, or shooting all over myself. I should have done this way, and then, you know, I missed out on the Apple IPO, or when Apple was $1, right, or whatever games we play with, you know, with us, and so. But when I'm in the now, in the present, it is where the happiness happens. And where I think any human being, right, like I said, has the ability, capacity, and right to be happy. But it wouldn't happen if I was living anywhere else but in the now.
Correct. So if our listeners want to reach out to you, what's the best way for them to connect with you? And how do they find your book?
Our Happy Divorce, everything social media. If they want to reach out to me directly, my Twitter and Instagram is Ben Swig Radio. And the book is available at Amazon, Barnes and Noble. I think anywhere books are sold for the most part. And look, if you're listening, and you are interested in a book, but, you know, for whatever reason, because of, you know, current situations, or you just can't afford it, please reach out to me. I will get you a book. You know, this is, you know, as corny as it sounds, Omar, this was truly an altruistic endeavor for me and my ex-wife. We're not, you know, I know there's a bunch of teachers in San Francisco and Youngstown, Ohio, rolling their eyes at the fact that Nikki and I are authors. So if, you know, you want a book and you can't afford it, please just reach out and we'll get you one.
Great. I will have all of Ben's information on the show notes. So just go to the show notes. You'll find your way to Ben and the book. 2 more questions.
Yeah.
What is the best suggestion you have ever received, or advice?
Oh man. The best advice I've ever received is probably, it happened later in life. But it was when I left the halfway house I talked about, 6 months, halfway house. I mean, they had a little transition group that you had to go to once a week, and it was run by this guy who had graduated the house years and years. He had like 25 years. And whenever we started complaining about something, he would tell us his assignment was, that it was almost a joke, was go read page 449. And that was it. That was his answer. You know why? Because acceptance is the answer to all my problems today. And so when I look at the best piece of advice I've ever gotten, is that acceptance is the answer to all my problems. All this world stuff going on, the COVID, the social unrest, I can only control the things that I can control, and I can change the things that I can change. But acceptance has to be the answer to both those scenarios. So,
love it. So for the listeners that are in a challenging relationship, you know, a challenging, unhappy marriage, or going through a divorce, what is one parting piece of wisdom that you would like to share with those listeners?
I want to make it clear that Nikki nor I are proponents or you know, carrying the flag of divorce, right? It's a very tough, especially as kids. It is a tough decision to make, and the bottom line is that it absolutely fucking sucks, right? The pain, the heartbreak, the you know, especially the kids, and the guilt.
Yep.
It's just the fruit salad of every emotion that you don't want to feel, especially, you know, us. But it can get better, and you don't have to live your life holding on to that resentment and that anger and that bitterness for the rest of your life. And that if Nikki and I can do it, And again, why we wrote the book. If you knew more about us, I think you learned a little something about me in this past hour. But Nikki is just as hard-headed, right? But if we can do it, we're pretty much convinced that anybody can do it. So it does get better. It doesn't have to be, I'm going to date myself a little bit here, but it doesn't have to be the War of the Roses. If you don't know what I'm talking about, look it up. Look it up and watch the movie.
I've seen it.
Right. And that, there are hundreds and thousands of people out there who have been through it. There are so many resources out there today. That was the most beautiful thing about the book, is we sort of kept our head down and didn't, when I started business, I'd look at, competitive stuff, but we just wrote the book, took 4 years. And then all of a sudden we're going to release the book. Let's go look on socials, see what's happening. And there's all these support groups for co-parenting and for blended families. And so take advantage of those, right? Find one that fits. It doesn't have to be Nikki and my story, but find somebody you relate to. Find somebody that does it the way you want it, or talk to them, because it is the most welcoming group of people who are doing it for money that I've ever worked with. They want to collaborate. They want to help people. There's divorce coaches. There are people there who are doing, and the tide is shifting. It's no longer the War of the Roses out there anymore. And the new normal, I hope, is going to be this collaborative, this working together for better outcomes for the kids first and foremost. But just like everything in life, it ended up being better for Nikki and I, because we became better people and happier people. And guess what? We don't have to walk around for the past 12 years with this hatred and this, just the nastiness towards our ex, even though we're both happy and remarried. I see people like that all the time. It's just, we don't have to do that. So it's going to suck. I can't sugarcoat it. It is, you're dealing with romance, finance, people around your kid, another dad, another mom, and it's going to suck. But just realize, and I hope that it can get better. It will get better, but you have to come to a place, I think, where you accept that it takes two to make it. It takes two to, ruin it. Now, there are some exceptions. I think like the physical abuse, sexual abuse, like there's some
right,
outliers that we're not even dealing with. But no matter what happened, no matter who did what or who didn't do what, there's a solution. And, Nikki and I are just one example of that. So I'm sorry you're going through it. It is, something that I still remember. And I hope I never actually forget the pain that I went through, leaving the house and, the guilt and all that stuff with my kid. Cause it motivates me. But it will get better.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Spectacular. Ben, thank you so much for joining us, brother.
Hey man, I appreciate it. Like I feel like, you just meet one of those guys that you just could feel like you could just shoot the shit with for hours and hours. And, I feel that way with you. So I appreciate you sharing your platform with me for this little bit. And again, more importantly, thank you for everything you're doing for the recovery community.
Thank you as well, brother. Thank you. All right, folks, we have now reached the end of our show. Thanks for joining us. And as we say here in Costa Rica, pura vida.
Pura vida.
Thank you for joining us on another episode of the SHAIR Podcast. And be sure to click subscribe to the SHAIR Podcast YouTube channel. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, on all the major social media platforms. Go to our website, the SHAIR Podcast. Go to my website, omarpinto.com. Find out about joining the SRC, the SHAIR Recovery Community, or one-on-one coaching with me by setting up a free consultation. Thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you next week on the following SHAIR Podcast episode.